This year, or this past season, the 2023-24 season, the Ballon d'Or nominees for that year have now officially been announced. 30-man nomination. To be honest with you, right? Side note from even the players that got nominated. I feel like this 30-man nomination is a bit excessive. I can't remember when they changed it, but for the longest time, the Ballon d'Or was just 20 names. And 20 names even is a lot, right? Like to be one of the 20 best players in the world, that's a big accomplishment. But 30, I feel, is like excessive. And when you look at this list, right, I feel like that's the reason why there's a few guys on here that really have no business being considered one of the best players of the last year. Like, no disrespect to them. And I say no disrespect, but I'll be real. A few of you guys might think I get disrespectful in this video. Like, there are going to be some players that I speak about that, quite honestly, chat, I don't think have any... There's no reason why they should be on this list, personally. But without further ado, let's look at a few of the names, right? But in my opinion, 30 names just off the bat is excessive. I think 20 names is more than enough, to be honest with you. And making or adding an additional 10 on top of that, for me, it makes it almost seem like make-a-wish a bit. Like, oh, there you go. I'm going to just throw you a nomination. I think 20 would have been enough. But anyways, let's start Jude Bellingham. I don't think anybody can have any qualm about Jude Bellingham being on this list. In fact, he's probably one of the favorites to win this award. For me, probably a top 3 candidate for this year's award, in my opinion. Obviously, won La Liga, was actually La Liga Player of the Year, won the Champions League with Real Madrid as well, too. Made it to the Euro final with England. Great individual year for Bellingham. Great team year for Jude Bellingham. I think he's a very worthy nominee, and for me, he should be top 3. I think he should be on the podium this year. Underneath him, we have Hakan Çalhanoğlu, who was kind of like the midfield general of that Inter team who were so dominant in Serie A. For me, one of the most dominant Serie A wins that I've seen in a long time. Was part of that Turkey team that went to the quarterfinals of the Euros. Good year for Çalhanoğlu. I think, yeah, I'll give him that. I'm not gonna like go too much in his nomination right now, but he had a very good year, Çalhanoğlu. Dani Carvajal is on this list. Dani Carvajal, of course, the right back for Real Madrid, who won the Champions League, scored one of the goals in the final, their 2-0 win over Dortmund, won La Liga, was a constant in the team that obviously won the Euros in Spain. Again, very, very good year for Dani Carvajal. Underneath him, we have Ruben Diaz, won Manchester City, the Premier League, obviously went to the quarterfinals, I think, with Portugal. I have to be honest with you guys, chat. Let me even just give you guys, like, the first 3 that I've named, I have no qualms really about them being nominated for the award. Maybe Çalhanoğlu, right? I don't have a qualm about him being there, but if he also hadn't been there, I don't think anyone would have been too surprised. Whatever. Diaz is another one, right? I think it could have very easily been someone else on this list over him, and no one would have really batted an eye. I don't think this was a remarkably spectacular year from Ruben Diaz, both for club or for country. Obviously, he was part of that City team that won it, had some big performances, but I didn't think this was one of Diaz's better years for City, to be honest with you. This would not have been a nomination for me. I'll say it. I don't think Diaz has a huge claim to be on a 30-man list for the Ballon d'Or, let alone a 20, which is, in my opinion, what it should be. But more power to him. Underneath him, you got Artem Dovbyk, who was obviously the La Liga top scorer for Girona, who had a very good year. Went to the Euros, and I have to be honest with you, he was one of those guys I was intending to keep an eye out on. I think he had an awful Euros for Ukraine, was one of the biggest disappointments for me personally, because I really went in there not having seen a lot of him for Girona. Obviously, I know he scored a hell of a lot of goals for them on their run to the Champions League positions. But in the Euros, very, very disappointing. And I mean, again, he won the Golden Boot in Spain, so fair enough. If that's what it takes to get into the Ballon d'Or top 30, more power to him. But again, in the Euros, when I really kept a close eye on him, I thought he was really, really disappointing, to be honest with you. Underneath him, Phil Foden. Remarkable year in the Premier League Player of the Season. Was really like a coming-of-age season, in my opinion, for Phil Foden, right? So many years in the past, we'd kind of been wondering what's his best position? Where does he fit in the City team? Is he more of a side piece to the likes of De Bruyne and Erling Haaland? But this was a year where De Bruyne missed half the year. Erling Haaland missed key parts of the season as well, too. And you really saw Phil Foden take initiative and kind of be the main guy for Man City en route to the Premier League title. But then you kind of combine that with the Euros, right? Where the way I'm talking about Dovbyk, about disappointments of the Euros, you could make the argument Foden was the disappointment of the Euros. I think he had a really poor campaign. No goals, no assists, but even the performances, forget about even the output, the performances in general, it really was a player that was at times just looking to find a role, looking to even make an impact on the game. I thought Foden had a really, really disappointing Euros. But when you combine what he did in the Premier League for Manchester City, combined with a few really good performances in the Champions League too, I have no issue with him being in this list. Not at all. Yamal top 30 for his season at the age of 16. Crazy. We'll get on to Yamal in a second. Yeah, Diaz. I don't even think Diaz was the best City defender this year. Like, I think Gvardiol could have had a much better case to be nominated on this list, the way he closed out the season for City. I think Akanji was probably... You could make the argument Akanji was City's best defender this year. I could genuinely make the argument. And then combined with his performances for Switzerland at the Euros too, I think Akanji has kind of been done by big name tags here, right? Ruben Diaz is a much bigger, internationally acclaimed center back, but I think Akanji had the better year than him. Moving on, Alejandro Grimaldo was maybe the signing of the entire season. Came on a free to Bayer Leverkusen, who obviously had an incredible season. He, as a fullback or as a wingback, put up insane numbers for Leverkusen. Was such a big part to everything they did. Didn't play basically at all in the Euros for Spain, but what he did for Leverkusen domestically, I don't really have a huge issue, even though it's, yeah, I'll just say it. For this year, Grimaldo deserves to be on this list. I would agree. We have Erling Haaland, who for his own standards had a down year, but for anybody else, it's still a damn good year. Top scorer in the Premier League, won the Premier League, didn't win anything else, and didn't play, obviously, in the Euros because Norway didn't qualify. But still, just like Dovbyk, right? And he's better than Dovbyk. He deserves to be on this list. Scored the most goals in his league as his team won the league. It's a no-brainer. Mats Hummels. This one for me, chat. This is another one for me that's shaky. Obviously, I actually think on his run to the Champions League final was really, really good for Dortmund, but didn't make the Germany squad, wasn't selected for that. And for Dortmund domestically in the league, I don't think he had a very good season, Mats Hummels, right? Again, knockout football in the Champions League, very, very impressive. But in the league, I don't think this was anywhere near one of Mats Hummels' one of his best seasons, man. That's just kind of my opinion. Dortmund's best center back, maybe in the Champions League, but in the Bundesliga, I didn't think Mats Hummels had one of his best years. Just my opinion. Just my opinion. Did he win UCL Defender of the Year over Rudiger? Do we think Hummels was better than Rudiger? I'm not too sure about that. I don't think Hummels had a better Champions League campaign than Rudiger. Man, just give him credit fucking out. I don't have to. All right. First of all, this is my stream. Second of all, I have my opinions. Third of all, you're entitled to yours. But I don't know. Like, he had a good Champions League run. Like I said, I don't think he was the best defender in the competition. I don't think he was that great in the Bundesliga and doesn't have any international acclaim as well either. Just my opinion. Harry Kane, European Golden Shoe. Didn't win a single trophy, again, which is going to hurt his overall ranking in this, as it should. But when you're looking at individual performances domestically, in the Champions League was the top scorer in that as well too. So he won Bundesliga top scorer, UCL top scorer. He was technically the Euros top scorer, even though he shared it with like 1 million people. Overall won the European Golden Shoe. You can't complain about this one. Toni Kroos, very, very good season. Kind of a farewell season, if you will. No, I mean, not if you will. It was his last season in professional football. So integral to Real Madrid. And you're seeing it even this season, even though this year doesn't really factor into it. But if you really want to know how important Toni Kroos is to Real Madrid or was to Real Madrid, just look at how the team is operating in his absence. He was so crucial to them in the Champions League, so big for them in La Liga. I think his Euro campaign was exaggerated a little bit, personally. I don't think he was that good in the Euros. I almost felt at times they were trying to paint it as like this, oh, the last dance for Toni Kroos. He's running the ship for... I didn't think he had an amazing Euros, personally. But for Real Madrid, he would have made this list irrespective of the Euros, personally. So he's here for me. Ademola Lookman. This is, again, for me, big red flag here. So for me, I wouldn't have a Ruben Diaz. I think Hummels is fortunate to make it here. And I think Lookman is extremely fortunate. Now, don't get it twisted. He scored a hat-trick in the Europa League final. That's a massive achievement. But over the extent of his entire season, did Ademola Lookman have an amazing year himself? I don't think he really did. He had a decent season in Serie A. Did he have a great AFCON? Cam, how was Lookman in AFCON? It was decent. I don't know. If Lookman is on this list, he's gonna be towards the end of the Ballon d'Or list. Personally, I didn't think he was exceptional, Lookman. I think he had an exceptional game that, in my opinion, great AFCON or not, let's call a spade here, right? If Lookman never scored a hat-trick in that final, no one is even mentioning him in Ballon d'Or conversation. Let's be very honest here, right? That performance in the final is what got him on this list. So I don't know. I'm not huge on his inclusion, personally. Emi Martinez is the only goalkeeper on this list, actually, which is interesting. But of course, he had a great year for Villa as they went to the Champions League, excuse me. They came top 4 in the Premier League. Was the goalkeeper for Argentina, and to be fair, saved Messi and Argentina a few times in that competition. Was Martinez, so basically putting Martinez over any other goalkeeper on this Ballon d'Or list is basically saying Martinez was the best goalkeeper in the world this year. Was he? I'm trying to think. Like, he might. Let me think though. Who would have been a better goalkeeper goalkeeper. Lunin had a very good year for Real Madrid, but played one game in the Euros, was benched the rest of the competition. Yeah, Mamadashvili had a good year as well too. Maybe he was. Maybe Emi Martinez did have the best year. Who knows? And maybe he does deserve to be on here. Like, he was very, very important to Argentina. Massively important. So I guess. We'll keep going. Lautaro Martinez, no question, deserves to be here. Top scorer in Serie A, top scorer at the Copa America, scored the winner in the final, scored goals. I think he scored the winner in the Copa Italia final as well too. Just a massive, massive year for Lautaro Martinez. And I feel for him because that miss in the Champions League and his Champions League performance against Atletico in general, it's a massive smear on his name at the moment. And I feel for Lautaro because I always feel like when the whole world is watching him, that's when his performances tend to be the worst, which probably speaks to him as a player, right? That's why he's not considered elite. But I feel like because when everybody is watching, Lautaro is so typically underwhelming, it kind of paints this picture that Lautaro in general is an underwhelming player. But look at the year he's had, and here's a stat for you guys as well too, and I think this is correct. The last 5 seasons, I think it's 3 players have scored 20 or more league goals. Maybe it's the last 3 years. I think it's the last 3-4 years. There's only 3 players that have scored over 20 league goals in each of those 3-4 seasons. In the last 3 seasons, the only 3 players to score 20 plus league goals in all 3 years: Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland, Lautaro Martinez. And that's not to say he's on their level, but it shows you his prowess in front of goal. It shows you how consistent this guy is putting up numbers for Inter Milan. And I think it's also very impressive that he's shown that he can do it with so many different strike partners now. He scored 20 plus of Lukaku, I believe. Scored 20 plus of Edin Dzeko, and he scored 20 plus of Marcus Thuram. You put this guy in a front two, and for me, he's as deadly as almost every striker in the world. In a front two, Lautaro is crazy, man. But I think he absolutely deserves to be on this list. And I would actually expect him to rank quite highly based on his performances. Next up, Kylian Mbappe, best player in Liga, top scorer in Liga. I think he was joint top goal scorer in the Champions League with Erling Haaland. If not, he just finished a goal behind. It was very close between the two of them. For me though, right, Kylian Mbappe, he should be on this list, no doubt about it. But how highly he'll actually rank is going to be massively hindered by the fact that, in my opinion, forget about the Golden Boot in the Champions League. I thought he was very poor when it mattered the most in the Champions League. Like, extremely poor. I would say round of 16 onwards, Kylian Mbappe did not move the needle for me. And then in the Euros, scored the penalty against Poland. The rest of the tournament, you can say mask or no mask, was not up to the standard that we are supposed to hold Kylian Mbappe to. So he deserves to be on this list. But if he's making top 10, it's closer to 10 than it is to 1, that's for sure. Martin Odegaard, captain of Arsenal, who again went very far in the Premier League title race, but again fell short. Decent in the Champions League, didn't play in the Euros. Yeah, I mean, on performances, I think Odegaard had a really good year. But I think this is where, again, when we're talking about 30-man list, Odegaard is going to be between 30 to 25, in my opinion. In my eyes. Next up, Dani Olmo should not be on this list. Now, good Euros. Very, very good Euros. For Leipzig this year, first of all, I think he missed 2-3 months of the season through injury. So it's not even like he was like consistently firing for Leipzig. Production-wise, if you want to go off that, his output wasn't crazy for Leipzig. Not for his own typical standards. Leipzig didn't really have a superb year. I don't think Olmo had one of his more vintage years. I think he's really on this list because of his performances in the Euros. He was one of like the 6 players who was tied for Golden Boot. Really came clutch in the knockouts. But in my opinion, based on his entire year, Dani Olmo was not one of the 30 best players in the world this year. And really, in my opinion, that's what the Ballon d'Or should come down to. The best player in the world. For me, Olmo this year, outside of like a 2-week stretch, and even the Euros, right? He really kind of emerged round of 16 onwards. And fair enough, you can say that's when it matters most. But I don't think Olmo's season, in terms of body of work, as you guys know, I love that word. I think he's very, very fortunate, to be honest with you. And again, if he's on here, for me, he's closer to 30 than he really is any higher in the list. Cole Palmer is on this list because of production, right? Massively productive year for Chelsea. Most goal contributions in the Premier League. Carried that Chelsea team to, I would say, like, what, 6th Conference League. Scored in the Euro final, I guess, but didn't really feature much. I think Cole Palmer's done really well to make this list. I think he's made this list because of his numbers. Let's be real. Look, his performances and his numbers were crazy. And I'm big on performances. But also, to rank high in the Ballon d'Or, you have to have other things going your way. Your performances in the biggest games, your trophy cabinet inevitably is important. And that's what really hurts Cole Palmer here. So individually, had an amazing season. Total package, again, he's for me between 30 to 25, 30 to 20. That's the way I view it. Declan Rice, I think Declan Rice is not, again, top 30. Yeah, he's going to make the top 30. Again, probably for me, Well, you know what? I might have to make my own list here, right? To be fair to Declan Rice, had a very, very good year for Arsenal. And I would say he was one of England's more consistent performers. I wouldn't say he was amazing during the Euros, but he was one of their more consistent guys. So I don't really have too tough of an issue with him being on this list. You guys are saying he can't be on here. I think I've named a few guys that had worse years than Declan Rice, to be honest with you. I'm saying some people say he deserves it, and some people say absolutely not. He was poor at the Euros. I thought he was okay at the Euros. I didn't think he was great. I didn't think he was bad. Let's keep going. We can go back to this because I'm gonna basically give you guys who I think got robbed and who shouldn't be on this list at the end. Rodri, no question about it. Again, for me, should be in the top 3 minimum. Should be a top 3 podium on the Ballon d'Or this year. Incredible for City. His importance, his influence, his consistency, even adding production this year to his game as well too. I think I was one of the first people to actually say Rodri, if you really watch his game, is playing as more than just a 6. He's basically playing as a 6 and an 8. Filling in the gaps that Gundogan had left behind. For Spain, one player of the tournament, but again, this is not hating. This is just my opinion. I don't think he was a player of the tournament. I think big name bias got him that. But Rodri for me is without a doubt top 3 Ballon d'Or candidate this year, for sure. Antonio Rudiger absolutely deserves it. You guys are telling me Mats Hummels won Defender of the Year in the Euro. Wait, hold on. Who gave Mats Hummels UCL Defender of the tournament? The UEFA didn't give any awards this year. How would Hummels have won UCL Defender of the Year? You guys just made that up, I swear. Yeah, nah, that's crazy. Fair enough. I fell for it. Bro, you guys are telling me Hummels won UCL Player of the... I was actually believing it. I was going to say, I did not see him lift any award whatsoever, bro. In my opinion, Rudiger was the best defender in the Champions League. That's the way I view it. And I believe if the award was still there, he would have won it. Rudiger in the Champions League, in particular, the marquee performance was against Haaland, right? Absolutely locked up Haaland. Locked him up. For me, locked up Kane, even though you could argue maybe, well, I don't think Kane or Haaland were at their physical best in those games, but locked both of those guys up. And one thing about Rudiger as well, too, right? You look at the injury problems that Real Madrid had this year. Alaba missed the whole season. Militao missed much of the season. Nacho was in and out of the team. Tchouaméni was playing center back with him at times. Ferland Mendy was playing center back with him at times. But Rudiger was the constant, every single partnership that they gave him. For me, without a doubt, the best defender of the year, in my opinion. He was the best center back of this last season. And I would even say he's a top 10. He's top 10 for me. Like, all power to Mats Hummels. But for me, Rudiger was by far and away the best defender of this season. Bukayo Saka was one of England's better performers during the Euros, was one of Arsenal's better performers in the league campaign. You could even argue he was probably their best attacker for both England and for Arsenal. Yeah, again, top 30. Like, it's hard to argue that Bukayo Saka wasn't one of the best 30 players of the last season. William Saliba, I think, has to be here. This is, for me, the one Arsenal guy above anyone that I think has to be here because I think he had the best Euros out of Rice, Saka. Odegaard didn't even play there. So I think he was arguably the best defender in the league this past season, or if not best, top 2. Was one of the best defenders at the Euros. So good. Yeah, I have no issue with Saliba being here. Federico Valverde, for me, I always say it, the most underrated player in the world. In my opinion, it's not even close. The Swiss Army knife of Real Madrid, plays so many different positions, so many roles, gives anything the team needs him. Goals, assists, tackles, carrying the ball, interceptions. The guy's an absolute freak of a midfielder. Had a very, very good campaign with Uruguay as well, too. So Federico Valverde, for me, has to be here. I'm a big Fede fan. And I think, yeah, that's the thing, though, right? Fathom. Like, this season means nothing to the Ballon d'Or this year because the Ballon d'Or criteria ended at the end of the Euros. So based on what he's doing this year, it doesn't really matter. But, yeah, I mean... He has been Real Madrid's best player this year. Man United fans saying where Arsenal players should place. LOL. Yes, correct. I am saying where Arsenal players should place. Yes, thank you. Vinicius, for me, rounds up the podium. Has to be in the top 3 this year for the Ballon d'Or. In my opinion, the best player in the Champions League this season. Very good in La Liga. Obviously, the Copa America kind of lets him down. But when I think of individual performances, especially in big games for Real Madrid, Vinicius was the guy. In Europe, he was absolutely incredible. Vitinha, again, this is where, for me, top 30 allows guys like Vitinha to sneak in. Good season for PSG. Solid campaign for Portugal in the Euros, but I don't know, man. Like, this is an underwhelming inclusion for me, Vitinha. It's a little underwhelming. He was good for PSG. He was probably PSG's best midfielder, but I don't know. This one for me, I'm not really feeling it. Nico Williams. I'll be honest with you, chat. I didn't really follow Nico Williams too much for Athletic Bilbao, so I can't speak on his performances too much domestically. But based on his Euro performances, has to be here. So good in the Euros. Obviously grabbed the opener in the final. I thought he had the performance of the whole tournament against Italy. I just think he was amazing during the Euros, man. And I can't speak too tough about how he did for Bilbao. To be fair, he won the Copa del Rey with Bilbao, right? Which is obviously a massive accomplishment for his club. Yeah, I think Nico Williams, I can't really fault that. Florian Wirtz, Bundesliga player of the season, the best player on that Leverkusen team. Goals, assists, creativity. Played a solid Euros. I didn't think it was amazing during the Euros, but what he did for Leverkusen this year is a shoo-in for this award. Granit Xhaka for me is also a shoo-in for this award, or shoo-in for this nomination. Such a good year for Leverkusen. Again, one of the best signings of the season. Incredible for me in the Euros before he obviously went out to England. No issue with Xhaka being here. And then Lamine Yamal, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is he the youngest nominee ever for Ballon d'Or? I think he has to be, right? Yeah, Lamine Yamal is obviously the final, or based on alphabetically. Again, how can you argue this? He was 16 years old this whole season and was one of the best players in the world. At the Euros, personally, I would have given him player of the tournament. I think he was the player of the tournament. Was Barcelona's best player this past year, and he's doing it all at 16 years old. Lamine Yamal, for me, worthy inclusion. So, those are the 30 nominees for the Ballon d'Or. Me personally, Lookman would not have made my top 30. Mats Hummels probably wouldn't have made my top 30. Maybe he sneaks in. Maybe. Diaz would not have made my top 30. Olmo would not have made my top 30. And Vitinha would not have made my top 30. Hummels is like sneaking in, if that. And even Dovbyk, look, I'll give it, again, he maybe sneaks in based on his La Liga Golden Boot. Guys that I think were robbed. Let me say this, right? Griezmann should be on this list. Now, I understand Griezmann at the Euros, when we talk about disappointing players, was one of the most disappointing. But Griezmann for Atletico Madrid, this club season, was one of the best players in the world. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And here's the thing, right? The difficulty with the Ballon d'Or is the fact that there is actually no criteria listed out. How do you determine the Ballon d'Or winner? I've seen players win the Ballon d'Or given for one reason one year, and then 10 years later, a player will win it for a completely different reason. Like, I'm a big Messi fan. I think Messi's the greatest player of all time. He's probably my favorite player ever. But I saw Messi win 2010 the Ballon d'Or because, in my opinion, he was the best player in the world. But then on performances. But then in 2022, personally, I think, look, he won it because of the World Cup. But was he the best player over the whole stretch of the season? I think it'd probably be Erling Haaland based on performances. And then there's years where I think Messi has been the best player based on performances but didn't win it. So I just feel at times the criteria for the Ballon d'Or is very, very inconsistent. Me personally. But if you were to ask me, how would I decide the Ballon d'Or? I think three things have to come into play. And they come in order. And this is, again, my criteria. So it's my list. First of all, the biggest thing when it comes to Ballon d'Or, in my opinion, should be your performances. How good did you actually play? Damn it, guys. The Ballon d'Or should be who was the best player in the world for this period of time, for the season. That's what it should be. And who was the best player? Well, you debate that off performances. So in my opinion, performance is the most, in my opinion, I'm not saying this is how the Ballon d'Or is going to get decided, but if I were the one voting, the biggest criteria for me would be how good were you? What did your performances say? Now, second, and I go back and forth. For me, undoubtedly, performances are the most important thing. Second, obviously, now let me tell you the other two criteria, and you guys can help me decide. Is your performances on the big stage, in the big games, more important than your trophy cabinet at the end of the performance? What's more important? Big game performances or trophies? Of course, both are important. I'm not trying to say one's not important, but which one should be valued more than the other? Me personally, I think big game performances are more important. I think so. And this is really where it comes into play, right? Black LA Bud says for individuals, it should be performance. This is where I think the Ballon d'Or gets so flawed when it comes to the voting. I think at times we really overvalue trophies when it comes to the Ballon d'Or. And of course, like, look, in my opinion, you cannot win the Ballon d'Or without at least winning one trophy. But this is an individual award. The award for being on the most successful team comes at the end of the year when they give your team a trophy. That's the reward for winning leagues and winning Champions Leagues. A team trophy. The Ballon d'Or and the Premier League Player of the Year and La Liga Player of the Year and the Golden Shoe, those are all individual awards that, in my opinion, should go to individual performances. Let me give you a few examples. I remember when Jorginho was being gassed up so much to win the Ballon d'Or because he was on Chelsea, who won the Champions League, and he was on Italy, who won the Euros. The way I viewed it, I didn't think Jorginho was the best player in that Chelsea run to the Champions League. I thought N'Golo Kante performed better individually for Chelsea in that run. And I think for Italy, I think there were numerous better players than Jorginho in that run to the Euros. But because he overlapped the two most successful teams of that calendar year or of that season, he was kind of propped up as, oh, this is the guy that should win the Ballon d'Or. Another one that I kind of give you, Schneider. Everyone thinks, for me, right, this is my hottest take of anything in football. I think Wesley Schneider being robbed of the Ballon d'Or in 2010 is the biggest robbery, is the biggest myth ever, personally. Although he had an amazing season, I don't think he was the best player for Inter Milan on their way to the Champions League. And I don't even think he was the best player at the World Cup. So if he wasn't the best player at the World Cup, and he wasn't the best player in the Champions League, and he wasn't the best player in Serie A, how can he win the Ballon d'Or? Well, the logic is, he won the Champions League, he won the treble, and he also went really far in the World Cup. I don't understand that logic, personally. For me, that makes no sense whatsoever. How many trophies, when it comes to individual awards, how many trophies you win and how successful your teams are should never be more important than how good and how important to those teams' success you were. When it comes to individual awards, that's just the way I see it, man. So anyways, having said that, I think Griezmann this year is very, very unfortunate not to make the Ballon d'Or this year. Because I believe in the club season, Griezmann for me was a top 10 player in the world. That's how good I think he was closer to top 5 than he was to top 10. Griezmann for Atletico Madrid this year, I believe, had one of the best seasons of his career. I think he was so good creatively, so good in front of goal. Obviously, in terms of individual, he kind of broke Atletico Madrid's record, which I know is not a season thing, it's like a career thing. But I thought Antoine Griezmann, in my opinion this year, was incredible, man. And I think I think really, the reason he's not on this list is because in the Euros, he was an absolute ghost. Griezmann was one of the worst big players to perform at the Euros. But club-wise, I think Griezmann easily deserved this, man. I think he easily deserved to be on the Ballon d'Or list. Other players. Obviously, Leao didn't make it. Leao didn't have a great year. He didn't have a great year individually. His team didn't have a great year. The only reason I bring up Leao is because they were saying who were the players that missed out on the Ballon d'Or this year. Let me read a few of you guys out for you. Obviously, the big ones are Ronaldo and Messi. The first time that both those guys are on a Ballon d'Or list in, 21 years? I think since 2003, which is absolutely insane. It kind of just signals the end of an era. Other players to miss out. Virgil van Dijk didn't make it. In fact, no Liverpool player made it whatsoever, which I actually think is maybe a little harsh, right? So Arsenal have 4 players in the list. And Arsenal had an amazing year. Well, they had a very good year. And their players were very good as well, too. But I think Liverpool, all in all, had a pretty comparable season to them. They both went pretty far in the league title race. Liverpool, obviously, they won the cup. And I think Liverpool's individuals also had pretty good years as well, too, man. I think, yeah, man, like it's difficult. Van Dijk didn't make it. Salah didn't make it. Trent didn't make it. Alisson didn't make it. For me, those are the big 4 for them. I think you could argue Salah and Van Dijk, they could have had a case for it, to be honest with you. I think Van Dijk in particular. I think Van Dijk at one point, we were talking about him like, yo, is he going to win Player of the Year in the Premier League? Like, if Liverpool had won the league, he could have been a huge candidate for PFA Player of the Year. But obviously, Liverpool didn't get a single nomination for this. Jamal Musiala didn't, of course. I think he had a decline in his performances from the year prior. Didn't win any trophies. Had a good start to the Euros, but maybe petered out a little bit at the end. De Bruyne didn't make it, which isn't too hard to understand why. He missed half the season, even though when he came back, he was huge for City. Julian Alvarez didn't make it. Robert Lewandowski didn't make it. Rodrigo didn't make it. Now, Rodrigo is the one I think a lot of people are pretty disappointed with his exclusion. Rodrigo had a pretty inconsistent year, though. That's the only thing, right? Like, I think the first half of the season, Rodrigo wasn't great for Real Madrid. And I think towards the second half of the season, where I think Ancelotti really tweaked the system to get the most out of him, I think that's when you start to see Rodrigo kind of like find himself. And especially in the Champions League, Rodrigo had some massive performances, most notably against Manchester City when he scored in both legs. But I think he had an inconsistent year. I think, yes, he performed in big moments, which is one of my criteria, but his performances throughout the year, and then Copa America obviously didn't have the best campaign. Could he have made it? Yes. Is it a huge robbery for me? Not really. Frimpong is one. Should Frimpong have made this list? Should Eduardo Camavinga have made this list? Should the kid from Gyökeres from Sporting Lisbon, he put up crazy numbers for them. Should all of those guys have made this list? I think they're all debatable, right? Let me give you guys my opinion on who should win. Like I said, the top 3 for me is Vinicius, Jude, Rodri. Now, each of these guys have a good case to win this award. I don't think any of them would be robbing the other. That's just my opinion. If you ask me who has the least case out of the 3 to win it, I think Jude Bellingham has the least case. Now, Jude Bellingham, in my opinion, from, I would say, August to February time, I think you could argue Jude Bellingham was the best player in the world. I think you could really argue that. I think Jude Bellingham between August to January, February, I think was insane. Sensational. The performances, and look, I think a big thing, obviously you can't take this into account, but a big thing to even gas up Bellingham's season last year even more than it should have been, you look at how difficult it's been for Mbappe to acclimatize to life at Real Madrid, right? I know he scored 2 in his last game, but let's be real. It's taking him some time to get there. You look at how quickly Jude Bellingham hit the ground running last year for Real Madrid. Immediately embraced that stage, embraced that kit, and took to life as a Galactico in the blink of an eye. As what was he, a teenager still last year? He had just turned 20. It was insane. And I really think that debut season from Jude Bellingham is going to be one that we look at in the next 10 years, right, as one of the greatest debut campaigns we've seen. Because genuinely, guys, it's not normal for a player to come to Real Madrid in his first year, that young, completely take over. It was incredible. And I know he won La Liga Player of the Year, and I think he was Real Madrid's best player in La Liga. But let's be real, right? Jude Bellingham petered out in terms of his performances. He did. Towards the end of the season, Jude Bellingham, and I would say the last 3 months of the season, maybe even 4, but I'd say 3. Jude Bellingham was not at his best. I don't think Jude Bellingham was even in the top 5 best Real Madrid players towards the stretch of the season, the home stretch. I think Rudiger, I think Vinicius, Fede, Kroos, maybe Bellingham, you could say 5. Performances in the Champions League knockouts for me weren't great whatsoever. So in my opinion, and I think at the Euros, right? Obviously his team makes the final, and he had that massive moment against, Slovakia, which even got England that far to begin with. But in my opinion, I don't think Jude had a great Euros, and I don't think he had a great end to the season. Now, you could say he stopped scoring. I understand that. And look, me, more than anybody, understands it's not all about scoring and assisting, especially for a midfielder. But I personally believe that Jude Bellingham's performances as a whole were not as good in the last 3-4 months as they were at the beginning of the season. And you could also argue, devil's advocate would say, well, of course they weren't as good. He was playing at a best in the world capacity the first 6 months. I get that. But me personally, if I'm looking at all 3 of these guys, and like I said, all 3, if any of these 3 won the Ballon d'Or, I wouldn't be outraged. I think they all have a good case to it. But if you ask me, I think narrowly, Bellingham would be 3rd for me. Now, between Rodri and Vinicius, both of them have the great performances, right? Obviously. Both of them have won silverware. Rodri maybe pips him, or no, I think he definitely pips him in terms of like entire campaign. Consistency, I think Rodri is probably the most consistent player of the last year. Right? His performance never really peters below. You could even argue this year he was so good. Maybe even it doesn't even peter below an 8. He was that good this season. And that's really what goes in Rodri's favor. Personally, chat, if I had a vote, I would have voted Rodri PFA Player of the Year. Nothing to take away from Foden. I think Foden was a worthy winner. But personally, I think Rodri was my PFA Player of the Year. And I don't even think he got nominated. But I think he was that good for Real Madrid. For Manchester City. I think he was their best player this season. Now, on the flip side, I don't think he was the best player at the Euros. I don't think so. Right? I think Yamal was the best player on that Spain team. I think Fabian Ruiz was amazing. I don't think Rodri was the best player at that Euros. But I think for Manchester City in the Premier League, Rodri, man. I think the stat is, right, every time, I think he missed 3 games for suspension. Manchester City didn't win a single one of them. At one point, Rodri was going the entire year without losing a game. United were the only team to beat them, basically, when Rodri was fit. So in terms of consistency, Rodri is the epitome of consistency. And he even added end product to his game this year. But on the flip side of Vinicius, when it comes to big game performances, and peak performances, like whose performances at their best were better, I don't think anybody reached the peaks that Vinicius did this last season. I think so. What I saw from Vinicius in the biggest moments for Real Madrid this year are some of the best performances I've seen from a winger in the last few years. It was unbelievable, man. It was unbelievable. Vinicius, towards the last 4 months of the season, really took all responsibility for Real Madrid, in my opinion, became the guy, and I think in terms of best performer during that stretch, I think it's Vinicius Jr. I think it was. Like, I don't think Rodri's best performances this year, like, I think he was more consistent than Vinicius, but Rodri's best performances did not reach the heights of Vinicius' best performances, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, guys. Feel free to disagree, and I'm going to reiterate it. If you have Rodri as your Ballon d'Or winner, I don't think you're wrong. I think he's a worthy winner. But if it was my vote, I think Vinicius was the best player this season. And people are saying he was unlucky to not get a GA in the second leg versus Bayern. Brother, the performance against Bayern in that second leg is one of the best performances of the entire season. That's an example of a player carrying his team to a win, without impacting the stat sheet whatsoever. So for me, personally, I would say, and again, I reiterate it, I'm not saying Rodri hype, Rodri should never win it, Bellingham should be nowhere. I think all 3 would be worthy winners for this year. But me personally, and what I value most, I would have Vinicius first, I would have Rodri second, I would have Jude Bellingham third. That's my opinion. Can I say this though, right? Without trying to appear as an old head or nostalgic or a hater of the new gen, I think this is one of the worst Ballon d'Or years individually that I can remember. I have to say that. When I'm looking at this list and I'm looking at some of these names, again, I reiterate, no hate. No hate at any of these guys. I'm not trying to hate on the new gen. And I think there's some really talented, I keep reiterating it. The next gen of players that are coming up, I'm very impressed. But this year in particular for the Ballon d'Or is one of the worst years I can ever remember for a Ballon d'Or. And I think you even look at it, right? The fact that Erling Haaland and Mbappe, who are, you could argue, are the two best players in the world. You could argue that. They're nowhere near this award because they didn't have great years. You look at the guys who are in contention to win this stuff. I think with Vinicius is my winner. I think you could genuinely make the argument that Vinicius 2 years ago maybe had a better year than he did this year. I think you could make that argument. And I look at some of the names as well too on this, right? Like, look, Haaland, for example, right? Haaland missed half the season, or not half the season. Haaland missed huge parts of the season, didn't qualify for the Euros, but Haaland, the way he's going right now, is going to steamroll to the Ballon d'Or. And for me, that's a top Ballon d'Or winner right there, based on how I expect Haaland to do. And this isn't even like Messi, Ronaldo tax, right? I even look at the last few ones. Benzema, the year that he had, incredible. No doubt about it, he was the Ballon d'Or winner. The year before that, or 2 years before that, Lewandowski, what he did in the Ballon d'Or, what he did in Europe that year. Unbelievable. I think for me, to look at the caliber of names in this year's award, and you compare it to any Ballon d'Or year of like the last 20 years, genuinely, just do it yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go do the research and look at the last 20 years of Ballon d'Or lists, not even winners, lists. Compare the names to the ones on this one. I think it's extremely underwhelming, personally. And I think whoever wins the Ballon d'Or this year, again, this is not hating on any of them. They would all deserve it, all three that I named. I actually think it's one of the weakest Ballon d'Or winners we'll have seen. The thing is, 2006 for me is a robbery. Ronaldinho probably should have won it. Zidane maybe could have won it. So I won't even include that one. But like players that deserve to win it, compared to like now, I think you're going back to like, dare I say it, Nedved, Michael Owen, like those years, I think are comparable to this one, personally. And then even then, like you look at the list that the names on that list compared to now, the names were, they read a lot better than the ones on this year's list, in my opinion. Performances are better than names. I completely agree. But we're looking at some of these names, right? Are any of these performances, like Hakan Çalhanoğlu had a very good year. Is it a Ballon d'Or worthy year? Is it? Would Hakan Çalhanoğlu make any of the Ballon d'Or lists for the last 20 years? How many of them would he make? No hate on Çalhanoğlu. I think he's a top player. But really? And then I don't think it's nostalgia is killing football. I really don't think it's a case of nostalgia. You look at even players that didn't win the Ballon d'Or in the last 10 years. Neymar doesn't have a Ballon d'Or. And someone on this list is going to have a Ballon d'Or before him. That for me is insane. Luis Suarez doesn't have and look, I understand why they don't have Ballon d'Ors. They don't have Ballon d'Ors because they fall in an era dominated by probably the two best players of all time. I get that. But also, that kind of shows that this list, Neymar would win. Neymar at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. Suarez at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. Lewandowski at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. Who else? Bale at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. Salah at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. Haaland at his best would win this year's Ballon d'Or. I just don't think it's a great year for Ballon d'Or winners, bro. Honestly, for me, this year's list and the potential winner is one of the weakest I've seen in a while. Nothing against any of them. More power to whoever wins it. But that's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. But PD 1 of 1, you're missing the point. I just said, forget about competing against Messi and Ronaldo. If you took those guys' years where they finished 3rd or 4th or 5th and took that exact season and dropped it in today's day and age, they would win the Ballon d'Or against this year's competition. That's what I'm trying to say. Of course, they didn't win it against Messi and Ronaldo. No one on this list would probably even make the list that year. That's my whole point. Forget about even competing. This is not disrespect against Vinicius. Vinicius is one of my favorite players. But the fact that Vinicius is going to have a Ballon d'Or and Neymar is not, and people are probably going to use that in Vinicius' favor, that for me is like, really? Is Vinicius now all of a sudden a greater player than Neymar because he's going to win a Ballon d'Or? I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about that. And that's not hate on Vinicius, but I think it's the reality. For people saying nostalgia, I don't know what year this is. Okay, so this is the Ballon d'Or in 2015. Let me read some of these names. Sergio Aguero, Gareth Bale, Karim Benzema, Cristiano Ronaldo, Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Andres Iniesta, Toni Kroos, Robert Lewandowski, Mascherano, Messi, Müller, Neuer, Neymar, Pogba, Rakitic, Robin, James Rodriguez, Alexis Sanchez, Luis Suarez, Yaya Toure, Arturo Vidal. Again, chat, I'm not trying to sound like an old head, but like, really? And now, like, I look at some of the names here. This is for me, my intention wasn't even to hate on Vinicius should be a Ballon d'Or contender every single year to the end of his career. Let me make that very clear. And he's a worthy winner of this year's award. But when I look at some of these names, like, bro, come on. Like, there's clearly a decline in quality. Why are we... Forget about this. I said I was going to be disrespectful. There is a decline in quality. Why are we pretending that there's not? You can't compare any year to 2015. We all know that was the most stacked year. Bring me another year, please. What year should I bring? Ballon d'Or 2006. 2006 is okay? Ballon d'Or 2006. Let me find it. So this is 2006, right? Random year. I literally just chose off the top of my head. If you guys want me to do a different year after this, I'll do it. Just to prove a point. Number 1, Fabio Cannavaro. Number 2, Gianluigi Buffon. Number 3, Thierry Henry. Number 4, Ronaldinho. Number 5, Zinedine Zidane. Number 6, Samuel Eto'o. Number 7, Miroslav Klose, who won the Golden Boot in the World Cup that year. Number 8, Didier Drogba. Number 9, Andrea Pirlo. Number 10, Jens Lehmann. Andrea Pirlo, for me, was the best player at the World Cup that year. He finished 9th. Like, come on, bro. Why are we acting like there hasn't, like this year in particular? I'm not saying the last 5 years of the Ballon d'Or, the awards fell off. But, bro, the thing is, you could argue the last 10 to 15 years were the best era of football. This is almost 20 years ago. Should I go even further? I'm telling you, give me a year, I'll find something. 2019, say no more. Number 1, Messi. Number 2, Van Dijk. Number 3, Ronaldo. Number 4, Mane. Number 5, Salah. Number 6, Mbappe. Number 7, Alisson. Number 8, Lewandowski. Number 9, Bernardo Silva. Number 10, Mahrez. Number 11, De Jong. Number 12, Raheem Sterling. Number 13, Hazard. Number 14, De Bruyne at 14. De Ligt at 15. This is because Ajax had that amazing year, right, for De Jong and De Ligt. Number 16, Aguero. Number 17, Firmino. Number 18, Griezmann. I don't think we've gotten to Harry Kane yet, who this year I think at one point was like rivaling Messi and Ronaldo in terms of numbers, I think in this season, 18-19, or was that 17-18? Maybe it was 17-18. 19, Trent. 20, Tadic, again for the Ajax year. Aubameyang, 20, because he won Golden Boot. Son, 22. Lloris, 23, because of the World Cup. 24, Ter Stegen. Like, bro, come on. Like, okay, these names towards the end, not the best, to be honest with you. But still, look at the top 15, top 20. I still think it's better than this year. This is literally the same now in bar Messi. You think this year is the same as 2019? Really? Hey, fair enough, man. Agree to disagree. The 2015 guys were established. These guys are young. Reed. That's great. I keep saying it. How many times do I have to say? I think a lot, like the next gen coming up, have a lot of potential. But this individual Ballon d'Or year, I'm not saying players have fell off, the game's gone. I'm not trying to say that. But this year for Ballon d'Or, bro, Mohamed Salah is one of the best players in the world. He had an off year. Haaland's one of the best players in the world. He had an off year. Mbappe is one of the best players in the world. He had an off year. The best players in the world this year didn't have great years. Hence why the award isn't that great this year, bro. In my opinion, this is one of the worst individual Ballon d'Or years. I'm not saying this is like one of the worst pool of players we've ever seen. But this year, the Ballon d'Or is it's a weekend award. Dude, 2008. Cristiano Ronaldo, number 1. Lionel Messi, number 2. This is the start of their dominance, right? Fernando Torres, unreal year. Number 3. Iker Casillas, unreal year. Number 4. Xavi, unreal year. Arshavin, I think, won the Europa League and was insane at the Euros. David Villa, 7. Kaká, 8. Zlatan, 9. Steven Gerrard, 10. Let them finish their career for... You guys, okay, Tobias, though, unless you just came to the chat the last 30 seconds... I feel like you're being disingenuous here, bro. I've literally said so many times, it's not about the players not being good. It's about this season of their career. The top 20, the top 30 for Ballon d'Or doesn't have an exceptional cast of players in terms of their performances this year. I'm not saying these players are all crap on the Ballon d'Or list. I'm saying this year for performances is a bad year for Ballon d'Or. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying what Vinicius and Saka and Bellingham and Yamal, bro, these are players that are going to dominate football for the next 10 years. But this year is not a vintage year for Ballon d'Or. I don't know how you could disagree, genuinely. Do you think Vinny has a Ballon d'Or season, an average season? I think JFN, like I said, I think Vinicius 2 years ago when Real Madrid won the Champions League, and obviously Benzema won it. For me, I would have had Vinicius arguably on my podium that year. I think Vinicius, I know Mane came second, I think, that year. For me, this is just shows it's not about the players. Vinicius, for me, that year was better than Mane. I genuinely think Vinicius could have made top 3 that year. And again, like I said, he could easily win it this year too. And he would deserve it. But I'm just saying, I'm not even saying Vinicius in particular. I'm saying the entire year. Vinicius' year is a Ballon d'Or worthy campaign. But the rest, bro, come on. Like, I'm looking at some of the names on this year's award, bro. Dovbyk is not one of the 30 best players in the world. Like, Dovbyk is not making a top 20 Ballon d'Or list for the last 20 years. He's not. I'm sorry. It's not happening. It's not happening, man. Anyways, guys, this is the beauty of football, right? And the beauty of sport in general. It's all opinion-based, right? So there's no real right or wrong answer here. That's just my opinion. I'm not trying to, like, and again, like I said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful here. Vinicius, for me, one of the best players in the world. I think he can go down as like one of the best wingers of all time. And I think he will. And he will win. For me, he should win the Ballon d'Or this year, and he would be a worthy winner, just like any of the other 3. But me personally, in terms of the entire list as a whole, from 1 to 30, I think if you were to stack it up to most of the the lists of recent years or however long you want to go, for me, it's not one of the more impressive ones. That's all I'm really saying. But like I said, it's all a matter of opinion. I'm not judging anybody who has a different one.